Hey Centerpoint family, my name's Tracey Ross, and I am going to join some of the voices that I've been hearing lately to share our stories from Centerpoint Church. I grew up in Canada, about 5 hours north of here. I didn't grow up in church, and my limited knowledge of God came from a few sporadic trips to Sunday school with neighbors and friends. I believe there was a God, but in a mystical, almost spooky kind of way. I had once heard in church that it was a good thing to have Jesus be with you, so I would pray for him to be with me, but pleaded, "Please don't come in my room." In my little girl mind, I had visions of the bearded man from the pictures coming through the walls like a ghost. Once I hit my teen years, I didn't step foot in a church again. I eventually stopped saying my childish prayers and got caught up in the life of a teenager. There was always something missing, though, something that I was yearning for in my life. In university, I was bombarded with information that challenged my tiny seed of faith. I remember having a conversation with a fellow classmate about the possibility that God existed, but that the Bible was just a book of stories used to teach us about morals and a good way to live. I remember saying with my mouth that I agreed with her, but I will never forget the sickening, nauseous feeling that came upon me as I said it. And still through all this, I felt that longing, that something missing. Then I met a guy. His name was Derek Munn. He was, by many standards, pretty hot. Along with that was a very flamboyant and magnetic personality. He could make me laugh anytime he wanted to. He shared his passion of music with me and gave me my voice, or at least convinced me that I could use it somewhere other than in the shower or in my car. It didn't take long for him to steal my heart. He also shared with me that he was a Christian. His whole family were Christians. What that meant to me was that they went to church every Sunday. He asked me if I would go with him, and I agreed to, even though I was a little nervous. I never really understood or felt like I belonged there in those early days, but there was one thing I did take away from it, and that was the joy that all of these people seemed to have. I wanted that kind of joy, but I felt like maybe these people were just better than me or more worthy than I was. We ended up in a city called Fredericton in New Brunswick and eventually to a home church. I remember early on listening to our pastor, feeling like he was talking directly to me. I was overwhelmed by the emotions that seemed to spring up from nowhere. I still didn't understand a lot of things, but I knew this was what I had been missing in my life. Right around this time, Derek and I got engaged. I really felt like everything was coming together for me. I had this new hope in the beginnings of a faith and understanding of God for the first time. I was about to have my dreams of having a family and being a mom come true. 2 weeks after our engagement, which was on Canada Day, Derek and I headed to one of his friends' churches to play and sing as a celebration. We had a great day, and I remember Derek telling me how much he enjoyed himself, ending the day with an a cappella version of "Will the Circle Be Unbroken." It was a sweet moment. I remember he took my hand and told me how proud of me he was. We had headed back to Fredericton trying to get home in time to catch the fireworks. At around 10:30, we came up over a blind knoll, and as though it had appeared by magic, I saw the black form of a moose. I had enough time to take in a quick breath, and we struck as though we had hit a brick wall. I think I blacked out for a moment because when I opened my eyes, the roof of the car was suddenly gone, and all I could see were stars. When my senses returned, I reached over to touch Derek's arm and started to call his name. He never answered me. The rest of that night is a blur of memories. Some are very vivid, others not so much. When something like that happens, your mind either cannot or does not want to comprehend what's going on. I remember at one point when my mind would allow me to consider what had just happened, I looked up into the sky and screamed at God. Why would he allow this? Why now when everything was so good and I was just about to have my dreams come true? The grief and despair that followed in those coming days and months was more intense and painful than anything I'd ever felt. It's hard to put it into words, I can remember trying to explain it to a friend by saying that it was something like someone had pulled the earth out from under my feet and I was falling into a black hole. At first, I couldn't pray. Luckily for me, there were many prayers sent up on my behalf. I had some pretty amazing people in my life who got me through each day. I didn't appreciate it at the time, but I do now. It was a slow process, but over time, the pain did lessen, bit by bit. I would find myself talking to God and feeling that longing come back into my heart. I ended up going back to school and got my degree in nursing. Around this time, I met up with a guy who eventually became my husband in 2003. And yes, babe, you're hot too. Little did I know a few years before that this friend Derek had introduced me to was going to become my husband. We were blessed with our first son, Logan, in 2004, and our second son 3 years later. In the beginning, in the early years, Cory wasn't a Christian. He was a good man and father and supported me in my beliefs, but couldn't understand them or share them with me. He's an engineer, a scientific black and white kind of guy. And like me, he wasn't brought up in a Christian home. He agreed to come to church, but did so mostly because I wanted him to, and because he agreed that it was good for our boys. I cannot count the times that I would lay my hands on his back while he slept and pray that God would somehow find a way to reach him. But he did reach him, and I guess I can leave the rest of that for him to share. He can share his own story, but that's mine. That's my story. I didn't come to faith instantly after a big moment or touch from God. Mine has been a walk with baby steps, starting when I was a little girl asking Jesus to be with me. I guess the Lord knows that everyone needs to walk at their own pace. When I look back over my life, I can see God's hand in everything, every moment. I will never be able to say that I'm glad that Derek was taken or truly understand why it had to happen that way. But I can say that God was there every step of the way. I know that meeting Derek was a part of the plan, and because of it, I now have a career that I love, a wonderful church, 2 of the most amazing boys, and a wonderful husband who is now a Christian. I made it through and have had every dream come true and then some. Everyone has a story. Everyone has to go through difficulty and pain. One of my favorite songs by the Casting Crowns says, "And as the thunder rolls, I barely hear you whisper through the rain, I'm with you." I have learned that even when we're in pain and it's hard to hear him, he will be with you. Whatever your story is, just remember that he sees what you cannot, and he will see you through to the other side. Thanks, friends.
Hi, everyone. Cory Ross here. I'm going to share a little bit about me and my story. I wasn't really quite sure how to do this, but then I was inspired by a song that I hadn't heard in a long time, actually since before I was a Christian. A song that I used to listen to a lot while I was growing up in the backwoods of New Brunswick, up in Canada. And it's so amazing how a song can bring back memories, how it can take you to a place and a time and just draw out emotions that you haven't, feelings that you haven't felt in a while. First it's the groove that captures your attention, but then you pay attention to the lyrics. And so listening to this song now, many, many years later, it was completely different for me, looking at it through a Christian lens. And the words really had new meaning that I had never thought about before, and reminded me of my story, actually, and how I've changed so much over the years since I've become a Christian. It also reminded me of a very valuable lesson, that without Jesus, you can do a lot of things right and still not find true happiness. With Jesus, you can do a lot of things wrong and still find true happiness. With Jesus, you find real peace, joy, and love. For it's the love of Jesus that makes you whole. Without it, something is always missing. And when I didn't have Jesus in my life, something was missing. Nothing that I did could fill that hole and I really didn't understand it. There were times, of course, when I did feel love, joy, happiness, obviously, but it was different. It's hard to explain. It was almost temporary or shallow in some way. Like when Tracey and I got married in May 2003. One of the happiest days of my life, and probably the most vivid memory that I have, is when she walked down the aisle singing to me. I'll never forget that. Or when Logan was born. About a year later, we had our first child. Amazing experience. And then, of course, Luke was born about 3 years later, and it was equally as awesome. Perhaps a bit scarier, though, because we were living in Nova Scotia at that time, and they believe in natural childbirth. So seeing my wife's eyes roll in the back of her head was somewhat alarming, but interesting nonetheless. At this time in my life, I was enjoying a lot of success in my career. And actually, this became my life's ambition. Hindsight being 2020, I had my priorities all wrong. I was trying to fill this hole in my life with success. But as the song reminded me, happiness was always one step behind. So what did I do? I tried even harder. This put a huge strain on my marriage. Actually, Tracey and I were growing apart at that time, if I'm completely honest. Things were getting darker and darker. I was very focused on work, not on my marriage. And my heart was hardened. It was like a stone. I would not let anyone in. I still had my wall up. And then Tracey convinced me to go to church. She said it would be really good for the boys, plus our best friends, still our best friends, solid Christians, great influence on me. They were going to this church, and they said, "Hey, you'll love the music. This music is awesome." And of course, so I agreed to go to this church, and I did love the music, and the kids were happy and doing well, but there was still something missing. So over the next couple of years, I built friendships, got to know the worship team. I filled in on the guitar from time to time. Tracey sang. And then one day we were asked if we would do music for an upcoming Alpha course. So we agreed. The pastor said, "Hey, since you're here, you might as well stay for the course." Very clever. So over the next 10 weeks, I learned the basics of the Christian faith. I opened up and I shared with others in small group discussions. And I think it was week 8 where we learned about the Holy Spirit. They called it the Holy Spirit weekend. And that's where it really happened for me. The Holy Spirit filled me and made my life whole for the first time. It was an amazing experience. I remember feeling changed, like a new man. It was noticeable. My friends told me, my wife told me, I became a better husband. I became a better father. I became a better friend. I started to think about others more and to love others rather than so focused on me and my career and achieving success. My mind no longer raced. I felt joy like never before. I loved deeper. And I felt like I experienced true happiness for the first time in my life. And of course, I still messed up a lot. And I did a lot of things wrong, and I still do. But with Jesus, you still have happiness, even when you mess up. This is amazing. I've learned so much over the last decade as a Christian, and of course I'm still learning. But you don't see the changes from day to day. But when you look back over like a decade, of course you see major changes, and you see what God has done in your life, and you reflect and you say, wow, God was in that the whole time. I have a whole new perspective on life now as a Christian, and it's been an amazing ride. So at this point, you may be wondering, what's the song that he's talking about? Yeah. Well, my wife has agreed to sing it, even though it's not really her style. And of course, I've changed some of the lyrics just so that it fits a little bit better and is kind of a summary of my testimony here. And it also speaks to my early 90s rock heritage a little bit. So I hope you enjoy it. And if you're not yet a Christian, please listen carefully to the words. There's only one thing that can fill the hole in your heart, and that is Jesus Christ.